Chapter 6. While Log held the rock from closing, Matthias peered into the hole. It was a long, dark tunnel sloping down the side of the quarry stone. There was neither sight nor sound of Gyosim. They called her name in loud whispers, not wanting to shout for fear of disturbing the snake. Matthias became impatient.
"Come on, Log. We'll have to go in there. Be as quiet as you can."
"Wait a tick," the shrew replied. Taking a small boulder, he jammed the entrance slab from swinging shut. "I'm ready now. Lead on, Matthias." They ventured cautiously into the long, sloping passage, digging in their heels to prevent themselves sliding right down, as Gyosim probably had done. On reaching the bottom, they stood a while to let their eyes become accustomed to the gloom. The floor leveled out. The tunnel was high and broad enough to allow them to walk side by side without stooping. As they walked further, Log pointed at strange symbols and weird signs that had been scraped into the surface of the soft stone. Though the quarry tunnels were natural, they had obviously been the lairs of generations of serpents. Most of the signs were of a reptilian nature. The friends pressed onwards until the passage broadened out into a small chamber with 2 more tunnels leading from it.
"You take the left, and I'll take the right,"
Matthias whispered.
"Mark an arrow on the wall with your sword at intervals. I'll do the same with my dagger. That way we won't get lost. Should you find Asmodeus, come straight back to this chamber. If he finds you, then the best thing to do is run as fast as you can and shout like mad."
"Take care, warrior. I'll see you later," said Log. Gripping his dagger in readiness, Matthias crept into the right-hand tunnel. It was slightly narrower than the first, but just as high. The walls were Yellowstone, so soft that it was almost like damp sand. Scarcely daring to breathe, and glad that his feet made no sound on the sandy floor, Matthias went ahead, remembering to mark an arrow every few yards. From somewhere up ahead, the young mouse could hear the sound of dripping water. The musical, echoing plops made an eerie noise in the sinister stillness of the passage. His paw encountered a space in the left wall. It turned out to be a rectangular anteroom. Matthias was horrified to discover that it was full of cast-off snakeskins. They lay about on the floor, dry and withered. He shuddered at the thought of their former occupants, the hairs rising on the nape of his neck as he swiftly abandoned the repulsive scene and hurried along the passage. It was more than twice as long as the entrance tunnel. As Matthias cut another arrow into the wall, he noticed that the carved symbols looked older, more primitive. This place had been a serpent's den long before it had been a quarry. The passage ended abruptly. Matthias walked out into an immense cavern. Great Hall of Redwall would have fitted into a corner of this colossal structure. At its center was a vast, shimmering lake that glowed with a pale, phosphorescent light. The droplets of water came from somewhere high up in the dark recesses of the roof. They dripped steadily down and broke the surface of the subterranean lake, causing a continuous ripple. Matthias noted that there were numerous other caverns and tunnels leading from this large cave.
"Asmodeus."
The sound froze the very blood in his veins. The adder was close by. Where, he could not tell. The deadly hiss echoed all around him.
"Asmodeus."
Matthias bravely tried to quell the panic that welled up inside him.
"If the snake knew where I was, he wouldn't waste his time trying to scare me,"
he reasoned.
"He would have got me by now."
Feeling slightly reassured, but still very uneasy, Matthias circled the pool, trying hard to ignore the loathsome hissing sound.
"Asmodeus."
Summoning up his courage, he stole silently into the nearest cave. In the glow that reflected from the pool, Matthias saw a sight that gladdened his heart. There was Gyosim, seated with her back against the wall. Matthias ran across and seized the gorilla shrew by her paw.
Gyosum, how did you get here, you little nuisance? We've been
Gyosum toppled on her side, dead. With a strangled sob, the young mouse recoiled. He could see the poison fang marks clearly upon the shrew's chest. Gyosum's face was bloated, the eyes screwed shut, the lips blackened.
Asmodeus.
Matthias stumbled from the gruesome death larder of the adder, out into the main cavern. He sat for a while, shuddering with horror at what his eyes had seen, hardly believing that the still body had been a warm, living, breathing creature not long ago. Forcing himself to rise and carry on, Matthias continued his explorations. The next entrance was a tiny hole in the wall, scarcely worth bothering about. Nevertheless, he decided to investigate it. Crouching on all fours, Matthias forced his way into the hole, which proved to be another tunnel. He began forcing his way along its narrow length.
Asmodeus.
The dreadful sound was much closer now. Struggling and pushing forward, he came to the end of the tunnel. Suddenly, Matthias was face to face with the giant adder.
Asmodeus.
The huge reptile was sleeping. With every breath it expelled, the snake's tongue flickered out, repeating the vile name.
Asmodeus.
Matthias stared in mute fascination. The snake's eyes were not shut, but filmed over in sleep. It was breathing slowly and regularly. The huge, muscular, scaly body was coiled in no recognizable pattern. At odd intervals, the immense coils would shift lazily with a dry, scaly rustle. The head, however, remained fixed in the same position. Across the jumble of banded coils, Matthias thought he could catch a glimpse of the tapering tail. There were other things in the lair of the snake. A fox's tail, wood pigeon wings, the head of a big fish, and fur pelts of many species of creatures. But Matthias saw only the sword of Martin the warrior. It hung from the fork of a tree root at the back of the viper's den. A large red pommelstone was set into the top of a hilt. The handle was of black leather and silver to match the belt and scabbard. Below a heavy silver crosspiece was the blade. Made from the finest steel, its double edges tapered to a ruthlessly sharp tip. Down the center of the blade ran a blood channel, either side of which there were symbols which Matthias could not make out. This was truly the sword of Redwall Abbey. It was his duty to get it. Matthias moved more stealthily than he had ever done in all his life. Inch by careful inch, paw by whisker, slowly, painstakingly trying to make his body as small as possible, he flattened himself against the wall to get by the huge spade-like head. The tongue almost slithered across his face as it slid in and out, constantly repeating the dreaded name.
Asmodeus.
He felt the adder breathing, its cold exhalations carrying the sweet musty odor of death stirring his whiskers. A coil moved and faintly touched his leg. Matthias sucked in his breath and squeezed closer to the wall. The snake blinked, sending the opaque tissue upwards. The young mouse was confronted by the wide-open eye of the monster staring directly at him.
Asmodeus.
The eye filmed over again as the snake carried on with whatever evil vision it was dreaming. Sweat like ice water drenched Matthias's fur. Asmodeus had opened his eye while still remaining asleep. There was no other explanation possible. The moments of suspense ticked by for what seemed ages until Matthias managed to squeeze past the serpent's head. Avoiding the gigantic coils, he walked quickly and quietly over to where the sword hung from the tree roots on the cave wall.
Matthias lifted the ancient sword down. Reverently, he placed both paws around the handle. Tighter and tighter he gripped it, until the point lifted from the floor and the bright blade stood out in front of him. He sensed how Martin must have felt each time he had held this beautiful weapon. The young mouse knew that he had been born for this moment, his grip causing the tremor of the steel to run through his entire body. It was part of him. Matthias's main concern was to get safely away with the sword. In the confined space of the snake's den, there was no room to wield the fabled blade. If he struck at Asmodeus, he would be crushed to death against the walls by the powerful lashing coils of the adder in its death throes. Nothing would be accomplished by such a foolhardy action. Like a seasoned fighter, the young mouse chose to nominate the time and place of combat. He looked around the den. The hole he had come through was obviously too small for the adder to have used for the same purpose. It served as a breathing hole for Asmodeus, also as amplification to echo the dreaded name through the caves and tunnels, as a warning to intruders. Near the snake's tail, which lay directly across his path, he saw the skins and pelts on the cave wall tremble slightly. They were covering the only possible entrance and exit for a reptile of such enormous girth. Emboldened by his ownership of Martin's weapon, Matthias tickled the tail lightly with the sword point. It had the desired effect. The long, scale-encrusted coils rippled as the serpent changed positions in its sleep. Speedily, he slipped through the curtain of skins into the passage. It curved in a crescent-shaped arc, bringing Matthias back into the main cavern with a luminous lake. Log-a-log came dashing, pale-faced out of the cave that contained Gyosam's body. Eyes wide with terror, he ran straight into the paws of his mouse friend, narrowly missing injury on the sword blade. Before he could be silenced, he yelled out in a panic-stricken shout, "Matthias! Gyosam's dead! I've just seen her in that cave! She's dead! Gyosam is dead!" In his den, down the tunnel, Asmodeus came awake.